Hi guys, my name is Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist, nomadcapitalist.com, and in this video, live from Kuala Lumpur, I'm going to talk about one of the developed world investment immigration programs, and not only talk about some changes that are coming to that program that may impact you if you're looking for a T or a second passport and you're willing to put some time on the ground, but I also want to talk about this on a bit more of a macro level and how I see some changes happening in the investment immigration space for people who are looking to get into these T or A countries. So I'm going to make a separate video in the near future about potential changes to the US EB-5 program. But in this video, I want to talk about the US neighbor to the north, Canada, and the Quebec immigrant investor visa program. This is a program whereby basically you invest in a passive government investment, you don't earn any interest, you keep your money in there for 5 years, and you meet a few other criteria, and you can live in Quebec, have access to Canada, have the status of being a Canadian resident that may help you with other visas, or actually may get you a little bit of extra visa-free travel on your existing passport, and gives you the opportunity to naturalize in Canada in the normal time frame, which they actually made a little bit easier recently. You have to spend a little bit less time, although you still have to spend more than half your time in Canada if you want to be naturalized. So the bottom line is that these TRA programs like Canada, like Australia, like New Zealand are looking for people who want to move there. They're looking for high quality people with wealth and with business experience. And quite frankly, a lot of these programs are underpriced when you figure the economies of these countries, what are the GDPs, what impact do these people coming really have for the country? In the case of Canada, Canada is super pro-investment, or rather immigration. They're super pro-immigration. What's politically sensitive for them is the vastly Chinese folks who are coming into the country through these immigrant investor programs, driving up the prices of real estate, and people don't like that. That's why the country as a whole shut down its national investor immigration program in 2014. I talked about that back then. I think it was actually the end of 2013 that they announced it, and they just threw out a bunch of applications, again, all from Chinese people. So up until now, the requirements of the QiIP in Quebec were that you had to put 800,000 Canadian dollars, so 600 and change US, into this 5-year passive government investment, which you would get back in 5 years as a zero coupon, basically. You had to have double that as a legally obtained net worth, and Canada, I think, has a bit more scrutiny than a lot of other places in terms of verifying that it actually is legal, more for folks in countries where that's an issue. If you're a Westerner, I imagine it's not that difficult to prove. They're suspending the program. They're planning on coming back online in the not too distant future with some changes. Some of it, as I understand, is a bit speculative. But I think we have the basic framework of the program, which is going to be raising that investment to 1.2 million Canadian, so just shy of $1 million US, raising the net worth requirement to 2 million Canadian. So now we're talking about a decent sum of money. There are apparently options, which I was not aware of, because I know that they have all these different, some countries for fast track programs have these financing options, which in some countries, and I'm not saying in Canada, but in some countries, there's been some discussion as to whether the government really likes them. Where basically, rather than putting out the 800,000 or the 1.2 million, you can have someone finance it, you can pay a one-time fee. That one-time fee is gone forever. You get nothing back in 5 years, but you also don't have to tie up your cash. As I understand right now, there are some folks who are talking about that, and I'm not able to comment on whether that's a good idea or not, but there are some folks who are saying, all right, 220,000 Canadian dollars will finance the 800 grand. So if you're willing to blow 175,000 US dollars, then hey, you can live in Canada and you can work towards naturalization. That number, they're saying, would go up to about 350,000 Canadian, so $250,000-ish, high 200,000 range in US dollars. So the bottom line is Quebec and Canada and other countries, I think, are going to be raising these numbers. Quite frankly, I don't, when you look at it from a government point of view, Canada is not a tiny economy. Borrowing people's money at a time when interest rates are near zero to begin with and paying them zero and then giving them their money back doesn't really seem like the most amazing deal, other than to generate people in the legal field sending in applications. And so I think that you will see some of these TRA programs raising their price. I think that EB-5 in the US is going to definitely become more expensive. They've already got tons of demand and people waiting years in some cases to do it. There was some discussion and some chatter in this industry saying that the price raise may make the US EB-5 program more attractive. For our audience of Western citizens, potentially US citizen renunciants or others who are on Tier B passports, I think that we understand why Canada is a far more attractive option than the United States, in that certainly while you would spend those 5 years living in Canada, you're going to pay some rather draconian taxes. And yes, when you become naturalized, you're supposed to indicate, hey, I plan to live in Canada and stay in Canada. For how much longer do you do that? I guess that's up to you. But there's at least a finite window with Canada of how long you would pay tax before you could naturalize and then eventually become tax non-resident and go somewhere else. Certainly, I think that on a separate issue, tax non-residence procedures may become a bit more difficult, but I don't think that they'll entirely go away. Although Canada may be one of the countries that would follow the US and actually implement something. If any country did, it may be Canada. So there's a lot of questions there, much of it speculative, but the bottom line is we're seeing TRA countries, in my opinion, going to be raising the bar on the requirements. Why is this important to a Western audience? If you're Australian, if you're British, if you're anything else, it probably doesn't matter. You're not going to be renouncing your Australian citizenship with all likelihood. I certainly do tell Australians who are concerned about more draconian tax policies in the future to get a second passport, even if it's on a very slow and affordable track. There's no need to go and live in Canada to do that, though. And in fact, I think having Canada and Australia would actually be counterproductive. You'd rather have, Australia and some Tier B country. But if you're a U.S. citizen or a former U.S. citizen, Canada may be an interesting place, especially if you like the United States. Canada certainly has some similarities with the United States that, for example, the UK or Australia wouldn't have. And so this program may be attractive to you. Overall, I think that most people in that position that I know aren't willing to put the time in the ground in Canada, aren't willing to pay the taxes in Canada, aren't willing to type that kind of money in Canada, and ultimately, we have a separate video on how to create a passport portfolio and the fact that if you create a good enough passport portfolio, you're only going to be losing 4 or 5 countries of significance as a former U.S. citizen or former Canadian, Australian, whatever, if need be. So is this really of significance to anyone who wants to live the nomad capitalist lifestyle? Probably not. But it is worth considering just in case you want to become a Tier B citizen, you want to give up the US passport, for example, and then you're planning coming back to one of the developed English-speaking countries in the future and just plunking down some money. This is one of the examples where I think it will become more expensive. The US and Canada are showing that. Australia and New Zealand may show that in the future. The UK is cracking down in some regards, particularly on Russians. So do understand that these big English-speaking countries for investment immigration will always be more difficult than going to a lot of other places. That said, the people who I work with who have already renounced their U.S. citizenship before they came to me, or others have said, do you really need to go to Canada? If you do, then now you know the requirements. Definitely subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. We cover a lot of second residence options, second passport options, how to do that from an international perspective, how to legally reduce your tax through residence and citizenship planning. And if you're looking for our most advanced strategies, we have a website that 4 million plus people a year enjoy going to, www.nomadcapitalist.com, and we definitely hope you'll check it out.